We are now in aspect 3 of Desjardins chapter 8 on liability in business. We are finally getting to talk about the actual kinds of liability there are in business. There are three. There's the caveat emptor liability, there's negligence liability, and there is strict product liability. Three kinds of liability in business are of relevance to us, as I just said. Caveat emptor, negligence, or product liability. Negligence liability is frequently referred to as product liability as well. And three, strict product liability. So once again, there's the caveat emptor liability, negligence or product liability, and then there is strict product liability. According to caveat emptor liability, a business is only responsible for what it has declared itself to be responsible in the contract with the buyer. In principle, if a business declares itself to be responsible for nothing and the buyer purchases the product, then the business is not responsible for anything, right? So caveat emptor liability is strictly contractual liability. From the moral standpoint, the caveat emptor liability only makes sense if the buyer is fully autonomous, well informed, has lots of options other than purchasing that product from the seller, and is not in dire need for that product. Whenever those conditions do not obtain, the business is taking advantage of the buyer's vulnerability and lack of autonomy. We can well imagine a certain medical product or service that a buyer urgently needs, and where there is a single provider, and perhaps the buyer is not well informed about the possible dangers of that service. The provider could then take advantage of the consumer's vulnerability and lack of autonomy and charge a very high price for the service, and absolve itself of any responsibility for the possible harms to the buyer from the procedure. This is all on the caveat emptor view of liability. That would be a lack of respect for the buyer's autonomy, as well as lack of respect for human autonomy and dignity in general. Second type of liability, negligence or product liability. And so, according to negligence or product liability, a business is responsible for the harms that it causes to the buyer that are the business's fault, even if the liability for these harms were not promised in the contract with the buyer. The harms for which a business is at fault are the harms that are due to the negligence by the business. So, how is the fault of a business for the harm is established? It's established by negligence. Negligence here refers to harms that can be anticipated and prevented. If a business neglects to make an honest goodwill effort to prevent harms that it can anticipate and prevent, then it is at fault for those harms. An example of the negligent product liability is the shortly to be discussed McDonald's case. I'm also thinking for negligence product liability, it may be something like releasing a car into for mass consumption that we know well ahead of time is likely to cause harm to consumers. That would be negligence. And it's the kind of knowledge that a producer has, but a consumer does not. So there's a real professional responsibility here not to be negligent on the producer's part. And so, roughly, that kind of liability due to lack of negligence is what we're talking about here when we're talking about negligence product liability in business. Third view of product liability is the strict product liability. According to strict product liability, a business is responsible for those harms it causes for which it simply makes the most sense for that business to take responsibility. Strict product liability refers to the accountability type of responsibility we mentioned above. Remember, previously we mentioned three types of responsibility: causal, at fault, and accountability. And so at fault is what supports the negligence product liability, and accountability responsibility is what supports strict product liability in business. For example, we may have a nuclear plant that has taken every precaution to be as safe as possible and is not guilty of negligence at all. But nevertheless, an accident takes place and harm is caused to a local community. So, who is liable for that harm and should pay for the mitigation of it? Hospital bills, environmental cleanup, etc. Option one: the people harmed should pay, but that would be cruel. They're already suffering. Option two: the whole society should pay. Small contribution from everyone from their taxes. But that seems to burden persons who are not much involved in what the power station does. Option three: the plant should pay for hospital bills, environmental cleanup, etc. And that way, the expenses are internalized by those persons who benefit from the plant owners, and the people onto whom the costs will be passed down in the form of higher prices in the future. Option three makes the most sense, as the people who pay for the damage are the ones that benefit from those damages and would be motivated to produce fewer of them. And that is a good example of the strict product liability, right? So once again, we've got this nuclear plant that pollutes due to no negligence of its own. So who should pay for the damages? And, the plant has taken every precaution not to pollute. So who should pay for the damages? Should the victims pay? Should the people of the country pay? Or should the people directly involved in benefiting from the plant pay? The thought is the third option makes the most sense for this kind of accountability responsibility, because they are the people that are benefiting. And so they should be the ones paying for the harms, as well as they will think twice or perhaps even cut down the harms in the future in order not to be paying the same prices for those harms. So strict product liability is usually shifted onto the producer.